No one at this point in the world can read these little clay texts. They don't know how to read it. It's been forgotten in this very difficult script, not connected to anything. It's not an alphabet. What do you do? No one knows. But he figures someone may learn sometime. So he brings back truckloads or boatloads of these clay tablets, 100,000 tablets and fragments, to the British Museum. He gives it to them. No one can read them. Gradually, people start to try to figure out. And there's a genius of a linguist named Sir Henry Rawlinson, who had been in Her Majesty's service in Persia and got very interested in inscriptions. And he found in western Persia at a place called Behistun an inscription that turned out to be by Darius the Great in 3 different scripts. And he began to think maybe he could figure out this cuneiform by comparing these scripts and thinking who he probably knew was involved. In order to even get to this inscription, this is on a cliff 200 feet above valley floor where there's a major trade route, showing the king receiving tribute from other kings. 200 feet above the floor, there's a ledge about 18 inches wide. Sir Henry Rawlinson, who's a young, very athletic guy, gets up there. He has a ladder. He's leaning on the ladder on this 18-inch wide ledge 200 feet above the floor, and he's copying on paper the inscription and bring it back down. And then he spends about 20 years learning how to translate. And he actually figures out how to read cuneiform. Now, by 1870s, there's a rudimentary knowledge. People can sort of get along in the language, in some versions of the language. And the next hero of our story is a young kid named George Smith. And he is the first one to really decipher part of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, George Smith is a very interesting guy. He had never been to college. He'd never been to high school. At age 13, he was apprenticed as a banknote engraver in London, firm that was making money, engraving banknotes. And he gets obsessed with biblical history, and it so happens that his firm is within walking distance on his lunch hour of the British Museum. He starts haunting the British Museum, and he's taught himself Akkadian. He's a genius. He's taught himself several languages in his spare time. He's now in his early 20s. And the curator of the collection, who himself barely can read any of this, discovers this kid can read it better than he can. They hire him, but because he's a working class guy, they're not hiring him as a curator, they're hiring him to clean tablets. But he feels desperately concerned to make a career, get out of being just a banknote engraver. He's fascinated by this stuff. And he figures if he can only find something, make some discovery that will connect one of these tablets to something important in the Bible, then people will be interested. That will make his career. So he starts looking through tablets after tablets after tablets. And after several months of looking, as he's cleaning his tablets, he finds a tablet in which some guy in a big boat in the middle of a flood is sending out birds to see if the flood has gone down. And the report is, which is probably exaggerated, he was so excited when he realized he found an ancient version of the flood story, he gets up and starts running around the room undressing himself. Probably he was just loosening his collar, which in the British context is like going naked, but nonetheless, he knew he'd made his career. And what he now does is he translates what they had so far of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is not as much as we have now, and he publishes it under the title of the Chaldean Epic of the Deluge, of the Flood. Chaldea being the region, like Abraham of the Chaldees is supposed to come from there. He gave a lecture about his discovery, which Prime Minister Gladstone attended. As the Assyriologist Andrew George has remarked, this might be the very first and last time in which a sitting head of state has ever attended a lecture on Assyriology. And he publishes a book that itself becomes a bestseller, The Chaldean Account of Genesis. And this is very interesting in more than one respect. And here you have on the cover in gold a statue that represents Gilgamesh with one of the lions that he's killed. This is George Smith's book. He has beautiful illustrations. Here's another one, Gilgamesh killing a lion. And he has that account and a whole bunch of other stories that he's found. This is 1876. Now, what's interesting about this from the literary point of view, you see, if you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, as I urge you to do, you'll find in its 12 tablets, one tablet, 1/12, is about the flood story. It's only one episode. But for George Smith, it's the thing that's making his career. It's what everybody cares about. So this whole story must be about that. And he uses this then to persuade the British Museum to send him back out to look for more tablets. The flood story is missing a piece. He wants to find it. He actually does find a piece back in the Nineveh ruins that he thinks will be it. Very interesting. He then dies a few years later. He's 36 years old, by which point he's written 8 books, established the field on a whole new basis. Extraordinary story. I was trying to figure out why he had died, and I went to the archives of the British Museum, the British Library. and was able to find a bunch of his letters and also his field notebooks, which have never been published, ever, and never even read by hardly anybody. And it's very sort of sad on his third trip out to get more tablets. He's writing letters home to his wife, Mary, and he's worried about their infant son, their 6th child recently born. He knows he's dying of dysentery. And he's worried about these little statuettes that he's hid in his boots. What will happen to them? And in reading his last lines in his field notebook, it was just heartbreaking. And these had never been published until I came across this. And I was asking myself, well, why is he there? Why is he dying for this? And the story had been by the profession following him. And most people going to this field in the 19th century were independently wealthy, or they wouldn't go in it, they couldn't. And he was viewed as this working class person, this amateur, who of course didn't know what he was doing and went out and got sunstroke and died. But actually, when you look in the archives of the British Museum, it's very interesting, because he had written a letter back on this third trip saying, oh, there's tribal warfare, there's cholera, I can't get anything done, I'm just going to come home. The secretary of the museum wrote him a letter back, Mr. Smith, the trustees will be very disappointed if you do not return with all the tablets you're expected to bring back. Writing to him as if he was a servant, right, who's trying for a day off that he didn't deserve. He stays 2 months longer and dies. So it was amazing discovery, who killed George Smith? You go into the British Museum archives, and the villain is the British Museum.